Welcome to the JAMODI podcast, where we interview coaches and leaders to find out not just what they do, but how they do what they do. Becoming the best version of ourselves is JAMODI, just a matter of doing it. So going back to a little bit of when you did spend so much time in coaching, and you also played for a while, so you've been around a lot of coaches. How did you build confidence in players?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, and even doing it now, I still do some player development stuff. I still work at some of the camps here and there, and I'm always a teacher of the game, and I can't stay away from it. So, and I love the individual time to help a player develop. So for me, developing confidence, a lot of it is about like where you are now and where you want to go, and then like helping them understand, even though you want to be here, like you can still be great. You got to be great here to get there. It's like helping them see the roadmap, I think, is a huge part to give them confidence, because it unlocks some of the pressure that they're putting on themselves. Like, I'm not there yet. I'm not shooting this. I'm not doing this. So I think so I would call it like zooming out.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're so zoomed in to right now, and this workout is like, hey, zoom out. Let's talk about where you've come from and how you got here. And then let's talk about like where you're going. You got a similar journey that you already had, and you've already proven success. So I think sometimes that's a big thing for me, is helping them understand the context of where they are to where they want to go. That's a huge part for players, because they struggle with that because they're just thinking about the zoom in right now. So collegiately, that was a big thing for me. And then I think also just getting them to understand like where their giftedness is a part of being confident. Is like, again, so in college, you find you have these high-level high school players. Essentially, they were the best player in their city, their state, their area. That what I mean. They've won all these awards. Their identity is basketball, and they really haven't, most of the time, had like tough stuff happen to shatter that identity. Well, you get to college and there's 13 dudes on scholarship, and it gets real. And it's not just about how talented you are or what you did before. That got you here, but now you have to start over. It was the entryway to get in. So even getting them to understand that is half the battle for freshmen, because they just think like, well, I'm just as good, or well, remember when you were a freshman in high school? Were you better than the senior? I mean, maybe in some ways, but you're doing that again. You know what I mean? Even though you're so proven now. So I think just, again, context, and then getting them to understand their giftedness is really important, in my opinion, because there's a difference between skill and something that you've crafted over time and hours and hours and hours of developing at a craft, and something that you're just gifted at. Somebody who can run and jump like a Sean Marion back in the day, or I'm trying to think of some guys from Dallas so I can give some Dallas shout outs. But I mean, obviously you look at LeBron James or Giannis, like those guys are gifted vertically, athletically, that's different than most people, right? Russell Westbrook, as a smaller guard, is gifted in that way. So I think you're understanding people, to get them to understand what they're gifted at, and then, hey, this is your skill levels over here, or your IQ is over here. Like, get them to understand the difference between it, instead of just thinking like their overall talent. So I think that's another thing for me. And then because confidence can come from you just having success before, and maybe you don't really know how you had it, maybe you don't really. So breaking that down. And then I think lastly, finding ways for them to, again, go back to their story and celebrate themselves, to bring that to them, to know that, hey, you can get through this. This is hard, but you've gotten through hard before. But also just, just finding ways to, so I guess two-part. One is just give them success that they can build confidence on, right? So like, let's say a guy's a shooter. You were an elite level shooter. There's times where you just hit a wall and you feel like you have a block, right? Like, I can't make shots, and you're in your head. So just finding ways to get them to be in the gym and have success. So don't do the hardest drills first. Sometimes you got to do some of the easier ones, right?
Yeah.
Like, success breeds more success, and let them feel good. And then you stack on top of that, instead of feeling like you're doing the same hard drill and they used to be great at this, but they're not. And they're measuring themselves versus their old self. So find a way to let them have success again. It's so important for players. And your job as an assistant coach in college is these guys have to perform. Your job is to help them perform. And it's not even about the plays it's just about like helping them get out of their own way most of the time and unlock that. So I'd say that's one. And then the second one is I think for players like in a development sense, and they're in this development model, if you will, like there's usually that part where like you come in and you're confident and then you fall off a cliff and you struggle and like you're in the pit, they call it. And I think that's where I did some of my best work and still do with former players and players is when you're in the pit is when you're the most open, the most humble, the most vulnerable, the most broken, and the most in need of answers, right? So I think that's a great time to build players up, but also getting to understand, like, in order to be confident, you usually have to go from in your comfort zone to out of your comfort zone to get confident at something else, right? So you got to get uncomfortable, but after uncomfortable, then comes comfortable. Okay, now I'm comfortable with this, and then now you can get confident. So I think it's usually a process like that. You have to be willing to push them out of their comfort zone. It can't always be feel good.
Yeah.
Because if you want to stretch them to a greater place, and it happens so much with the guys in college I work with, and even kids now that either want to play on varsity or want to play in college, it's like, yo, this is what's coming. So you can stay in this little safe comfort zone if you want, but in order for you to get confident, you got to get uncomfortable first. You got to let it be ugly and explain that to them. This is where you are. You're in this ugly part. But once you kind of get comfortable with it, with the reps and time, well, now you can be comfortable. Now you can settle in and be like, all right, I'm all right with this. And then from comfort grows confidence. And I think that goes with anything. So long answer, but I think it's a complicated question because in college, from my experience, that's one of the things I think that I had a lot of challenges with as a player and didn't have the guidance and guessed and checked a lot and failed at that a lot and finally kind of figured it out. And I think the same goes for life. Like sometimes we're navigating this thing and it's like people are not as confident as they may seem. So I think just figuring out confidence in general, whether it's athletics or life, like I wasn't married before, then I got married. I was out of my comfort zone. I didn't know what I was doing, right? I lived in Texas. Now I live in Colorado. It's not my comfort zone, right? So there's a process before you can get confident. So that's what I would say.
No, it's good. I want to go back to something you said early on about, I love how you said helping players to see where they've come from, because I think that's a part of the process that players forget quite a bit.
Yeah.
They get to a spot and they're frustrated, or they think in this moment that they've earned more or they should receive more. And what I've felt in the past is, what about, guys, the gratitude, to yourself, the thankfulness, the appreciation, because do you remember where you started?
Right.
And even though you're in this place now and it's not where you want to be yet, don't forget that journey and those steps. Because I think so many times we get a player and this is where they are. And we talk about, well, these are the steps that it takes to move forward. And that's a part of it. But that part of looking back in your journey and being able to, puff up your chest a little bit about the accomplishments that you've had, that's a part of confidence, is remembering those past victories, for sure.
And remembering the past challenges that you've overcome. You're faced with challenge now, but you've been faced with challenge many times before, and you've done it before, you'll do it again. That also feels like, you know what? Because that success breeds success. I just think there's more mental that goes into confidence than just seeing the ball go in.
Yep.
Because it's the time you spend by yourself in your own head. The rest of the time you're not in the gym, that's the valuable time. You got to give them something that they can connect to that helps them stay fueled, if that makes sense.
I mean, to me, when I think of a great player who just oozes confidence, I immediately go to Steph Curry. And so if you were to break him down, what makes him really special, one, that you mentioned, he's gifted. I would imagine he'd be a great dart player without having to practice very much, because of just the ability to place an object where he wants to place it. There's a gift there. But then you take into it the struggle. A lot of us know his backstory, the struggle that he had to go through and how much time he spent on his craft. You combine those two things within this ability he must have mentally to just believe and know, either
Right.
based on real experience or even just relative experience,
Right.
that I can do this. I would love if we could just somehow get inside his brain and hear his thoughts as he's coming down the floor before he's about to do something. I just think that would be incredible.
Right. I think he's not given credit for as gifted as he is.
Oh,
He is very, very skilled, and he's put the time in his craft.
he's an outlier.
But he is gifted. Like,
Yep.
we think about like his height and size, like, oh, anyone could do that. It's like, no, anyone can't do that. It don't matter how hard you work. He has some
He can throw that dart the same way.
And his accuracy
every time.
So, but I do think, to go to your part about confidence, the last part I would say is teaching players, where does confidence come from? And I got this from PGC. And shout out to PGC again, even though they're not sponsoring this podcast at all.
I wish they would, but no.
Trust me, I've had those conversations. It's not easy. But I say that and say that Dina Evans used to talk about this, and Dick DeVincio, who you also worked under or was coached by at camp.
Yep.
Confidence comes from two things, and then I kind of added my third. So one is preparation, which is part of what makes Steph so great, right? Mm-hmm. His routine, his regimen. Like, if you asked him about his stuff, elaborate, detailed, he knows what you know what I mean? So that builds a lot of confidence when you put in the amount of made shots the way that he does it, and ball handling. So that's one, preparation. The second one is what you daydream about or what you think about all day. And I never understood that one then I didn't say never. I didn't understand it as much in its power, and how much we have these thoughts that go on all the time. And what are we seeing during the day? And are we thinking of focus on the negative? And she gave the great example, Dina did, of like Dina Evans at the time would make 9 out of 10, and she would think about 1. And Kobe Bryant would make 1 out of 10, and he would think about 1 also. So there's this, it's what are you focusing on? She would focus on the one she missed. Like, I should have made that. I knew I could have made it. I could have got 10 to 10. And that's like what she's constantly feeding her brain and her body and her subconscious. So that track is just playing like an unclosed app on your iPhone, right? It's just playing in the background. And Kobe's just thinking about the one he made, like, yeah, I did that. You know, it's just a different mentality. So whenever you focus that intentional energy, so I think getting players to focus more on both. You can't just show up to the gym and be good, man. Like, you got to put the time in. Yep. You don't put the time in, you have no chance to change your confidence, right? And then the second part is, if you put the time in, but all you're focusing on is what you're not and who you aren't and how, you know, whatever's happening that's negative, that's not going to grow either, right? So you're counterproductive. And the third thing I've added is just success breeds success. You have success, it can breed more, but it also can be an ugly monster, because you can have success and think you've arrived.
You can forget.
And I think you said this earlier, you asked this earlier, like about a routine or one thing. One thing I'm at in my life right now is like, I feel like I'm in that place as a player where, like, if you're having success, how do you make sure you're staying to the formula of how you got this success, right? And not just focus on the success. You appreciate that. So part of my story is I transitioned from college basketball. My wife and I lived in 7 different combined cities in our first 3 years of marriage, right? Get that context. So my wife, for the last 2.5 years, has lived in my mom's house or her mom's house. And I've lived in the same, but I had an 8-month span where I coached long distance from my family.
Wow.
Right. So context is, we went from living in a basement to now having our first home that we have no business in. It's all like this God story, right? So I say this to say, last year I'm in unemployment in the basement, like so many doubts, fears, all this stuff going. And now I'm on this other side where this house has happened. We just hosted an MTE event, which was really awesome, Division I tournament, and it had success, and ESPN broadcasting happens, and all these things start falling in place, right? We're doing these businesses on our own and we're having success with them. And God is like, but how are you going to stay? How are you going to keep this formula going? And part of the formula for me is like making sure that I'm needing him, one. Yeah. Secondly is giving back. How much am I giving my time back to make sure that I'm sowing those seeds of humility and paying it forward and bringing the next person up. So every day, like that's part of where I got the message to sending people is like, how can I make sure that I'm humble and I'm still doing the formula that got us here? Yeah. And I think it's the same thing with confidence. For my confidence to be good in what I'm doing now as an entrepreneur, and I don't have a company that's just always going to pay you every month on time, no matter what. And I'm doing kind of these random, collectively good things, but it's not one place. So it's a lot more challenging to have confidence in it, and it's new. So I think the same thing goes for like when you're a player, is not getting away from the formula once you do have success and start feeling yourself and patting yourself on the back.
Yeah. Thank you for checking out today's episode. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, share it with your fellow coaches, and find us on social media for what's coming up next on the JAMODI podcast. It's just a matter of doing it.